Tami Brunk. Welcome to Stand, Speak, Shine.
So pleased to be here with you today, Sherry.
You and I are kind of the same person in a lot of ways, although you're further along the path with me than I am with some of these concepts of Venus and the feminine and astrology, especially, of course, astrology, because I've just dipped my toe into it's a whole world. But I did a session with you and I was well, first of all, I heard you being interviewed on another podcast. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I reached out to you and like, I want a session. And then we had the session and it was so rich that I had it transcribed. And it's just been such a joy to connect to you and to feel your depth and wisdom. So with that, let's just dive into some of the Venus mysteries. And maybe you can kind of define, because I know when I first heard about Venus mysteries, I don't know how long ago, I'm like, what have you been smoking? Whoever said it, like, what are you talking about?
What does that mean?
What the heck? And now I'm just like, I can't get enough. It's so resonant for me. So can you maybe just define what we mean when you hear a teacher say Venus mysteries?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I just want to say, for your listeners will know this, of course, as well, but when I offer readings to individuals like yourself, when I work with women like you, it's what makes me always remember why I do this work, because of the depth of passion and commitment that you carry. And so, yeah, when I left that reading also so moved, just so deeply moved. So happy to be here with your listeners. So yes, the Venus mysteries. Yes, I hear what you're saying. It's for a person who is just opening to this work. I like to bring to mind just to look at it like this. Okay, so over the last 10 years, probably, I think more and more of us are starting to work with the cycles of the moon, right? So you could say the moon mysteries, right? So we're beginning to understand that if we plan something according to a new moon or a full moon, or even the equinoxes or solstices, it's not like everybody does that, but it's much more common than it used to be. So there's something we kind of get, like our ancestors used to get, that working with the cycles of the sun and of the moon, there's something that our body is kind of entrained to with that. We're remembering something ancient and true and rooted when we start to remember how to align our lives with the cycles of the sun and the moon. So that's something that's becoming far more, I won't say common, but so much more so than it was 5 years, even 2 years ago. Right. So when I talk about the Venus mysteries, there's a lot to that. But one of the layers is to understand that if you're going to work with the natural cycles, and if you are a person who wants to connect to the sacred feminine, okay, that's one piece, that's one layer. If you want to be connecting to the sacred feminine, the divine feminine, if you want to be part of this larger kind of spiritual movement that is about remembering her, then you might want to start with Venus. Now, 30 years ago, we might have said it was the moon. And it is important to work with the moon if you want to reconnect to the sovereign feminine. But Venus, across many, many, many ancient societies, was the goddess herself. And so, for example, to the ancient Sumerians, when they first saw Venus rise as morning star, it's this stunning event. They didn't have TV. They didn't have, any of the things we have,
it's like
right?
Their Netflix.
It's like their stars. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And because of that, they would have seen things and felt things we don't feel. There were layers of nuance with that they would have tuned into. So the third brightest celestial object in the sky is Venus. She is, especially when she's really close to the Earth, when she's retrograde, when planets are retrograde, they're really close to the Earth. So Venus, when she's very close, right before she crosses between the Earth and the sun in her orbit, right after she's crossed between the sun and the Earth, you can see her in the morning sky. There's like this moment where you can't see her in the evening sky, you can't see her anywhere. And then all of a sudden she appears in the morning sky before sunrise. And there she is, this brilliant, shining planet. And they said, this is the goddess. The goddess has been born.
And some of us who are more entrained to see the sun or moon, would it mistake Venus for another celestial body like the sun or moon, right? Because it's just so epically there.
Right. She's just, yeah, I mean, in the sun and the moon, I mean, they're like, so Venus is big, obviously, you know, she's not, so yeah, it would be surprising. It would be surprising. It would be like, okay, except that it wouldn't be to these societies and these cultures, because literally in ancient Sumer, especially when Venus rose as morning star closest to the spring equinox, this was such a major event that they would have, the entire cult society would put on these reenactments to tell the story of the goddess Inanna and her descent to the underworld. And the reason they would do that is because, as we're going to talk about in a moment, the story of Inanna, who is this goddess who, the story about Inanna is a very powerful initiatory tale that was told in ancient Sumer about this feminine deity, this goddess who makes a journey to the underworld, goes through a sacred passage and initiation, and reemerges. So the story of Inanna was literally a description of the way the Venus cycle works. So Venus was so important to them that when Venus rose as morning star every 8 years, closest to the spring equinox, the entire community would celebrate that moment, right? So they all knew about it. If you can imagine living in a society like that, that always kind of blows my mind.
How nice to be celebrated for going into a descent journey, right?
Well, yeah, well put.
There's another whole aspect to that. But
right,
yes,
yeah,
just the acknowledgement of how we are interconnected to the movement of these major celestial bodies, how
absolutely.
it moves in our own bodies. I would think they would be more attuned to that. That's why they celebrated it.
Absolutely. Yeah, they would have, there's a part that would have understood that. And so we're beginning to remember. So the Venus mysteries are about, they have to do with the remembrance of the sacred feminine and understanding how to work with her at a very, very powerful level. And I've found that when people start to literally begin to track Venus in the sky and to track her cycle visibly, it really is like, it sounds so silly, but it really does open these portals in us. It opens us up to these mysteries. I've just seen it again and again and again. And what also happens is that people start to just fall in love with her. And it's because I think
that's what happened to me. I got
that's what happened to you, right? Yeah, you got bamboozled. Well, partly again because her cycle and Venus herself, the way her inner orbit relative to the Earth, she forms a beautiful pattern of a 5-pointed star or a rose. So this is where, so there's so
that
many.
was, I just want to put a time out there and how profound that was for me personally.
Yeah.
Because I didn't find out about the Venus mysteries until a few years ago. But prior to that, I was always drawn to the rose.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple layers to the rose path and the rose mysteries themselves. But when you pair it with Venus, do you want to say why the rose and Venus are connected?
Yes, absolutely. This is so literally the pattern that she creates, they have mathematical models now that'll show how she moves relative to the Earth. And that pattern creates the image of a star. That's a star, a 5-pointed star, or a rose. It's literally, that's the pattern that she creates. It's sacred geometry. And so the other way to look at that is to say she rises every 1.5 years in a different season. You'll see her as morning star every 1.5 years in a different season. And then she'll rise again as morning star. So each of those morning star rises or beginnings of the cycle creates one of the points of the star. So there's 5 points, 5 cycles in 8 years. So 5 and 8 are Venus's sacred numbers, which of course add up to 13. So there's just so much, magic in all of it, of course.
But it is unmistakably a rose when you look, people have done visuals of these and it's like, absolutely. Whoa, even NASA doing it is like, it's there.
It's there. It's absolutely a rose. It's just one of those incredible mysteries. I mean, in Venus, her orbit, there's so much about Venus that is, entire cathedrals. And there's I have to remember, I'll have to tell you again later. You can look this up. There's a man who wrote the Venus Blueprint, and he writes a lot about how the acoustics of many of these ancient cathedrals were resonant with other patterns within Venus's cycle. So there's so much within her cycles, within her movements that are absolutely mysterious, beautiful, magical, potent, that evoke the sacred feminine. I would say as well that she's often been called the sister to the earth because she's almost exactly the same size. She's comprised of almost the same materials, and she spins counterclockwise. So that's one of the really fascinating things about her. And I think she is paradoxical in many ways.
It's like the left-handed path.
Exactly. Precisely. That's exactly how I've always felt it and seen it.
Which is feminine.
We're
a little bit like left.
Well, left side of the body, left-hand path. And in fact, one of the most incredible experiences I had when I first started guiding women through this Inanna Venus journey we'll talk about was we had one man in our circle of about 80. My teacher, mentor, friend, and I created Venus Alchemy, a business that guided women through the Venus cycle. We did that since 2014. And we had our first group, we had one man and about 80 women. And he was amazing, courageous man.
Total brave, yeah.
So brave. And he was a pipe carrier. He had worked for many, many, many years with indigenous elders. And so he was also guiding a lodge. And as he was working with the Venus cycle, this was the Capricorn Venus cycle, which is the same cycle we are in now, because each cycle has a different face of the goddess or meta goddess. So in this particular cycle, he had a woman, an older woman, who came to him. She wanted to do a vision quest. And for various reasons, the way he actually did it was within the sweat lodge. And he said one of the things that started happening, and this was also during the Venus cycle and when something had activated at that time, he said during this vision quest, she started bleeding. She had stopped bleeding years before. She started bleeding. And he said he had the grandmothers, because the grandmothers are also a medicine that is connected to the Venus mysteries. And this is what's come through. So, and when I say the grandmothers, what I mean by this is really it has to do with our own blood and also spiritual female ancestors. But he had started working with the grandmothers, these female elders. As soon as he started working with the Venus cycle, they started really working with him. And so when she started bleeding, he had been taught, this is something I never knew. The reason they say to not have women bleeding in these ceremonies is because when you create a ceremony like this, in the Lakota way and in many others, there's a spin. The ceremony creates a kind of a spiritual spin, and it goes in one direction. And he said, what happens then is if a woman enters, she causes that energy to spin in a counterclockwise direction. And so that's why they don't want that to happen. In this ceremony, right? So this was breaking all the rules. So he said, oh no, the grandmothers told him, they said, you have to do things in a new way. Do the ceremony backwards.
Wow.
And I get chills even now.
I just got him.
My head, right? Yeah. They said, do it backwards.
Which is so analogous and I feel like metaphorical for this left-handed rose path or Venus path or feminine path.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because when you live in
undoing it all.
We're undoing it. We're unwinding it. Yes. Deconstructing. And who does that better than Gemini?
Yes. And just for all of you listeners, FYI, Tami and I are both Gemini moons. That's probably why we've totally vibing with each other on this crazy information. But it's about going underneath the hood, if you will, lifting the lid, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely.
And saying there's more here than what we're seeing with the natural eye. There's so much more going on underneath and behind the scenes to why we're experiencing what we're experiencing on the planet and in our bodies.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. And I think there's a deep hunger. This is why your listeners probably are listening and why we're here. There's such a deep hunger for those deeper layers, for that story underneath the story. Our souls are thirsty.
Yeah.
It's
and this
a parched
is the time.
desert out there. Yeah. This is the time. This is the time. Yeah.
So so what happened with that? So they unwound and she did it backwards. And then what was
They did it backwards and the ceremony just went beautifully. It went perfectly. I mean, it was just so powerful. So but the most surprising piece for all of that was that was the directive he was given. And I had never known that about the way the ceremony works, but this was just one of many examples where I felt, okay, Venus does things in the opposite direction. And one of the other riddles of Venus is that, related to what I'm going to talk about in a little bit with the Inanna descent story and the connection between that and the Venus cycle, is that in the story, when the goddess is in the underworld, what that literally means in the Venus cycle is that she's on the other side of the sun. So she's in the beams of the sun. So I love that riddle. It's just powerful. She's like, from our perspective, she's invisible. So the goddess is gone. She's dead. She's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But from her perspective, she's actually in the heart of great mystery. She's in the burning bush, right? She's whatever is not true for her is being burned away by the power of the great light. So it's the opposite. It's the inverse of what we think.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to go into Inanna, the goddess. We'll just say straightforwardly that Venus, the planet, the star, whatever, she's old, she's ancient, she, from a mystery or a mystic standpoint, sort of represents the goddess herself or the sacred feminine cycles. So the Sumerian goddess Inanna that you mentioned and how they celebrated this in their culture with Venus movement and cycles. Let's talk about the story of Inanna, because when this came through for me, and I learned this from another teacher, and I went through the Venus descent cycle, the whole thing, not to the length at which you offer, but it was like a mini version of, like, I think it was the ascension of, what do they call that? Venus retrograde. And so we went through this as a group container, and it was so powerful. And I learned the whole time we were going through, this week we're going to do phase 1, next week, and we went through the seven cycles of descent, and then the 7 cycles of ascent and the rise of Inanna. So do you want to talk about that myth just a little bit, so that we're kind of looking at this as the parallel with Venus?
Yes, absolutely. So first, the myth of Inanna is ancient. It comes from before 5,000, 6,000 years ago in ancient Sumer. It's the first written document, even before Gilgamesh, right? Just to put it in its place. It really is at the root of language, of written language.
So this predates even like when they would have first written the tablets for the Old Testament, let's just say. Like it predates that way before.
Predates all of it, way before. So the stories of Inanna were told pre-patriarchy. And the story we know of the descent of Inanna literally can be understood as a story that's describing the transitional zone between what we refer to in astrology as the age of Taurus, moving from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, which was a shifting from a more matriarchal era to a patriarchal era that occurred about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. So even in the story itself, to put it into context, it was taken from a much older story that would have been passed on through oral tradition, but it was told at a time to speak into the message of the goddess herself. The reason she went to the underworld in the story was to grieve the death of her sister's husband. Inanna's sister was the goddess of the underworld, and Ereshkigal was her name, and her husband, the great bull of heaven, had died. So this Inanna, the goddess of heaven and earth, the goddess who was beloved by all, she was paying her respects. She was, in a sense, going to the underworld to grieve the end of this feminine age and the beginning of this more patriarchal era. So that's kind of the context or the frame. And when I talk about Inanna now, I can't believe, after working with this cycle and this story for 12 years, I just now realized, you may know this already, the name Inanna literally means I am in Aramaic.
I did hear that, and that's so interesting. Another chill bump worthy thing, like
seriously, another chill bump. I mean, and for example, specifically, that was the language Jesus, Yeshua, would have spoken. So literally, when he would have said, I am the way, what he literally would have said was Inanna is the way.
Hmm.
And not to say,
In other words, I am is the way.
I am is the way. I
So
am is
he
the
was
way.
being the I am and teaching and leading us all back to the I am. And interesting that it's a feminine
Absolutely.
connotation, because that is
Exactly.
deep, deep wisdom teaching stuff right there.
Deep wisdom.
Very,
That
very
I am is
Sophia wisdom.
feminine. Yes,
Yeah.
precisely. Thank you so much. Exactly. So yeah, so that's also, and it's so funny because, just aside, there's a German Shepherd outside of my door right now, a friend, a dog that had just appeared out of nowhere in this neighborhood. And my neighbor, my former partner, named her Inanna. When I began to say her name, Inanna sometimes comes over. She started barking at my door.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
to say.
I was gonna say, I don't hear
Inanna's
anything,
here.
but okay, cool. That's like animal speak right there.
Animal speak right there. Yeah. So, okay. So Inanna, in these stories, one of the reasons as a goddess that she's so important is because she's one who really, her essence is very much about bridging the worlds of heaven and earth. That's one of the ways we can tune into her and understand who she is. But yes, absolutely. Also this wisdom of the I am, and those deep, deep mysteries. So in the stories of Inanna and her descent to the underworld, basically what happens is that, again, she chooses to go to the underworld. And in order to do so, she's required to go through 7 gates. And in each of these 7 gates, she removes a vestment, beginning with her crown and 7 vestments and ending with her royal robes. So she enters the underworld naked. She meets her sister who, and this is, one of those, these ancient stories are sometimes quite colorful, shall we say. So her sister kills her, basically. And so she goes through a death process. And so she goes through a death and a rebirth process in the underworld, and then she comes out of the underworld renewed through
And it was
having
like
gone through
3 days. So it was very
3 days.
analogous to like the resurrection story for
Right.
Christianity. Like she was dead for 3 days, wasn't she?
Actually, it's 60 days.
60 days. Okay.
But let me just say that her story is so alive and is so vibrant. So many women now, and so many priestesses have worked with this story because it's so potent and it's so original. It's taken on many flavors. It's taken on many tones, as it should be. The version I'm telling is the version that the Sumerians would have written because it's very precisely describing the Venus cycle. So in their version, it's 60 days because, well, I'll describe the way it connects in a second. So she's in the underworld for 60 days, and then she rises and she moves through 7 gates once again, and she restores, or she reclaims her royal robes, her golden girdle, all the 7 vestments, sacred items, until she gets to her crown, and she reclaims her crown. And then she basically emerges from the underworld as a fully initiated goddess and queen. So those are the mechanics of the story. And the way that it works is that at the beginning of the story, when you first, here's Inanna, you're introduced to Inanna, that's when Venus first is seen as morning star. She's very bright. She's in the morning sky. And then what will happen is every month she'll be with a little crescent moon, the waning crescent moon in the morning sky before sunrise. Every month the moon meets Venus. And that's like the little boat that she would travel in to go through the gates to the underworld on the river,
that's
right?
a fun way to look at it.
Isn't that amazing?
Moon?
Yeah, there she is, Inanna in the crescent moon. So she's with the crescent moon, again, waning, letting go of the vestments 7 times, sometimes 8 times. And then, and as this is happening, she's arcing up into the sky, higher, and quite brilliant. And then she begins an arc down, closer to the horizon. And then she disappears at some point, about 8 months in. She disappears, and she again is behind the sun from our view for about 2 months, about 60 days. And then she appears once again as evening star, very far from the earth, at her furthest point, just very faint, like the goddess who's been initiated. She's really, very, she's been through it all. And then she begins a journey up through the sky again, growing stronger and stronger as she does. And again, meeting the crescent moon, but this time it's the waxing crescent moon that she's meeting 7 or 8 times. So, and then she disappears from our view. This is the most mysterious part of the cycle, where she will She'll be evening star, again, she's very close to the earth. By the end of the evening star cycle, she's retrograde. So you'll see her very bright in the evening sky, and then she disappears. And within about 12 days, you'll see her as morning star. So she makes a complete shift from evening to morning star. And that's the completion of the cycle. So of course, we can connect the moon gates, the Venus moon gates, with the chakras. And this is part of why this is such a powerful tool to work
is 7, right?
Everything's
7 chakras, 7 gates. Yeah. And
exactly. Yeah. Sometimes there are 8
number
gates.
is a mystery number.
Yeah. The 8th gate is a mystery number. Sometimes it exists, sometimes it doesn't. It can be called the death by intent gate. That's one of the ways to describe it. It's also present in many mystery traditions. This sometimes 12, sometimes 12, sometimes 13. That's the lunar cycle. It's both. It's not just one. So it's 7 and 8. It's not just one with the Venus cycle as well. So that's the cycle.
Yeah, I love it. And what's interesting is you dive into it a little bit more, and you work with it, and you insert, of course, yourself into this heroine cycle of Inanna. Like, you're in this descent journey, and we cycle through this, and maybe it doesn't perfectly mirror Venus herself. But we also have things and situations in our lives that arise where we're kind of put into this cycle. And if you don't resist it and you allow yourself to release these, metaphorical accoutrements, and you get to the bottom and you stay in the dark night and you stay in the quote unquote underworld, there's that point at which you, depending on how it is aligned for you, and it's literally personal to each person, then you can start to rise and take on more gifts in each of those 7 gates. What I would love for you to speak to now is this alchemical process that ensues when you're going into a descent. What is that?
Yeah, what is that process?
It's what the hell is happening right now? So how do you even explain it, right?
Yeah, of course, I started coughing right before, which is probably, this is part of it, right? What is that alchemical process of the descent? I do feel that, the Venus cycle specifically, and Inanna and her mysteries, do transmit something very unique as well as very universal when it comes to this. One of the aspects is literally in the Sumerian language, the word meh that's the word they use to describe her adornments.
M-E-T.
So it's like the M-E.
M-E, meh.
Meh.
Okay.
No, what I always think it's funny about that, though, it's like the meat, it's everything that makes her who she is, that causes the goddess to know who she is, and her people will know who she is. This is the crown, helps you to know that she is the queen. All these adornments are her external identity, and that's what she has to remove. But what's mysterious, what I love about this story, to be honest, that speaks, I think, to the descent process when it's chosen, because Inanna chooses to go to the underworld.
She advocates for it with her male cohort.
with Dumuzi, right?
Yes.
And she also asked,
and he's I don't think that's a good idea.
So funny, right? There's so many layers to this. But the point in this story that I find to be the most moving is that Inanna is like many of us. I think of her as being like the phases in our lives when she begins, where we're on top of the world. Like we're in terms of our careers or where we're at in our lives in general, everything's flowing beautifully. And from the outside surface of things, it all looks good. But then there comes this moment where there's this stirring of something. It's like there's got to be something more.
Yeah.
There's got to be
something. That's alchemical right there.
That's alchemical right there. Yeah. But it's so beautifully stated in the epic poem. The way they say it is, she sets her ear to the great below, and they repeat it several times. She set her ear to the great below. I love that line.
I do too. I actually wrote it on a card.
Yes,
it's because that is not in the patriarchal tradition. That's some dangerous stuff right there.
That is some
by the great below to them is if you just stay pleasant and happy and your externals are great, and that's how you know you're doing well. So keep at it. Keep doing what you're doing. Otherwise, things could go south real fast if you don't.
They could go south, and you might too.
And that's actually part of it. You got to go south.
You have to go south. Yeah, in so many ways. In so many ways, you have to go south. In every way
She
possible.
set her ear to the great below.
She set her ear to the great below. She heard the call of soul. I feel like that's her soul calling. That's what I always feel in that moment. She hears that deeper call of soul. And we all, a woman who doesn't listen to that call, the cost of not listening is so great. The cost is so great. We've all had periods in our lives where we didn't listen, and we know the cost. And so it's the call. It's the call. And she is so courageous. She follows the call. And so this is also has to do with the phases of the Venus cycle. If a person is born in the Venus morning star phase, you have to have a very courageous heart. You have to be the one who really is willing to make the descent, to start out with everything and be willing to give everything. So the alchemical process does require, in a sense, it requires a deconditioning process, right? So the letting go of the crown, you really can connect it to each of the chakras. It begins by really laying down what your perception is around, or your old conditioned connection to divine. So for many of us, that might be the connection to the Father God.
Yeah, that's what it was for me.
Yes.
When I set my ear to the great below, my soul was like, okay, you can keep ignoring this, or I can ramp things up in your life that you really, and it wasn't like, it wasn't, I mean, it was a very spiritual, humbling process, but yes, there was this, here is what was sold to me as the truth in terms of deity and the divine and my connection and my, and it was very patriarchal. It was very male centric.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my soul was like, well, here we go. Are you ready? And like you said, and Nana has to choose, she had to choose it. And that's what makes it so empowering. But it also, in a way, it chooses you.
It chooses you too. It's funny when you say that. It's so important to say that. In Marianne Woodman's book, Dancing
with the Flame?
Dancing with the Flames. It's the Dance of the Dark Goddess. Yeah, I think that is the title.
Oh, okay.
I'll never forget, there's a part of it where she describes the initiatory path of going to see Baba Yaga. And she says that Baba Yaga, as one of these gatekeepers, has this series of questions. And one of the questions is, did you come to me by choice, or were you forced to come to me by circumstance? And what's so funny about that answer is that it's a riddle. You can't say yes, and you can't say one or the other. It has to be about 53% yes and about 68% no. There's like some weird answer.
I want to know what I'm committing to first here. Like,
right. So most of us, part of it is choice, part of it's not choice. So yes, say it probably the same for Inanna, but the alchemical journey of the descent is, I see it and feel it as an ensoulment process. It's the meeting of course, it's the meeting of the facets of ourselves that we have been afraid to look at, to see, to feel, to know. So in an individual woman's life, it might, in your case and what you're talking about, your dark night of the soul, your descent process, very much the one we're speaking of today, I'm sure you've had many, had to do with the most foundational belief system that you had been transmitted to you as a woman of great faith and devotion, right? So that was the most potent path for you. And that does speak to the crown. The crown has to do with our connection to deity, to divine. For some others, it might be that and this is where many of us are born at a certain chakra gate, right? So for some people, it might have to do with the focus of the journey is really on letting go of really old beliefs, and they're connected, but perceptions, the filters that you carry, the conditioning that you have around every layer of life and who you are and who you're here to be. There's that brow chakra, or the third eye, that needs to be cleared. You need to let go of the distortions. So, and on downward through the throat, the throat often, because I've guided women through this journey, hundreds of women, probably 1,000 at this point, And the throat chakra is one that is one of the most potent to really work with for women. It's the most sensitive for many women. So the alchemy must include the throat, must include an unfettering of whatever it is in the area of the throat, of self-expression, of speaking with a true voice. It has to do with that region of the body and of the energetic field. So the alchemy of descent requires a laying down of those distortions around how we speak, and how we tell the story of who we are. But of course, that starts internally, kind of like the chakras have a back and a front. Well, the back side of that throat chakra has to do with what are the stories you tell to yourself. So in this journey, we're unshackling, unchaining, releasing, letting go. And so what I love about this too is it's important to recognize, even if it's raw, even if it's primal, even if it's painful, it's also about a lightening process. Because that's not that all those things are heavy. A crown, a true crown, if anyone's ever worn one, it's really heavy. Right.
Well, I was a former state title holder for a pageant, and I could tell you that was part of the potency of this for me, is laying that down, that identity of being a former whatever. And and also just like, to me, the queen archetype and some of these archetypes of royalty really speak to me on a deep level. And to be with the people more than stratified as set apart as a queen, if you will. Like that was embedded into me from so young, that I was of this royal lineage, and it's like, no, we all are. And I'm so special, and I'm also not special at all.
Right.
When you talk about these different chakras and these different, how they represent different gates, and they're also representative of our bodies, and how I think there's a collective, I want you to keep going with the chakra, but also before I forget, like there's the planet Earth is going through its own descent journey. It has been for very, very, probably from the beginning. Can you see a correlation of whatever chakra gate we're at now? Is there something direct to point to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the way that I would say that there are many ways to describe the stage we're in right now as a planet, the age we're moving into and out of. Every culture has the story. The Toltecs would say we're moving from the 5th to the 6th sun. The Mayans would have said that the gates to that opened with the end of the long count calendar. A climatologist would tell you one thing. Evangelical Christian would tell you another. A Muslim would tell you another. We all know something massive is shifting.
Something is alive in the consciousness to let us know that things have to go to the great below.
Yes, things have to go to the great below. But what I would say about that is, from my perspective, from what I've seen and felt with this for many years, it's that when Inanna goes to the underworld, what we really are beginning to recognize is this is actually part of a natural cycle. So if you've heard the whole story and how she gets hung on a meat hook, it's a pretty brutal story, right? It's not pretty. And so, but what I've felt, the transmission that I got at one point was, the goddess chose, the feminine principle chose to go to the underworld for the 6,000 year period. This is just what happened. This is a natural cycle. And so now it's natural that she's beginning to come out of the underworld. And so from my perspective, we're just beginning a new 6,000 year cycle. There are many indicators that would say we are moving into and out of a 26,000 year cycle, or a much longer cycle actually for the Earth. And when I say that, I don't mean like anything's just completely the same repeating. It's like a spiral, right? So we're really in a very powerful moment for our planet. What we've never seen before, some of these layers, and I should speak into the larger astrology. But from the perspective of Venus in the Inanna story, to me, it feels like, strangely maybe, the most resonant story that relates for me is the Toltecs would say that we are right now transitioning from the 5th sun to the 6th sun. And the way they describe it is, they say it's a 6,600 year cycle, which is about right. So they would say, we shift from a day sun to a night sun to a day sun to a night sun. There's a natural alternating current. And so the night sun is understood to be a time more of the feminine. It doesn't mean it's night all the time, but it means there's more of a balance to the feminine, to the earth, to the dreaming. And so it's a more of an inward time rather than all about the external. And so we have, just as of 2021, according to them, shifted into the night sun.
Interesting.
Just another way of saying that the feminine is now needed to come into balance with the masculine.
Yeah, I love that. So I don't know if there's more you want to say with the chakras, because I felt like that was really, really powerful.
Yeah. So of course there's the throat and then the heart. When I think of the heart and the unburdening of the heart, I know I'm mixing so many stories here, but they're all related.
Good. It's great.
It's speaking from Gemini language, right?
I know. Yep. I'm tracking it.
So, I'm so in love with Ma'at, the Egyptian deity, and her stories, because from the perspective of that Egyptian goddess, when we die, our hearts are weighed. They're weighed in relationship to an ostrich plume of truth. The feather of truth and the heart are weighed. And if the heart is heavier than the feather of truth, then you don't go to the good place, right? This is how they would have seen these mysteries. So I always think from that story that the idea is we want to lighten our hearts. What does it mean to lighten the heart? What does it mean to lay down the burdens in the heart? So that's what she's doing too. She's laying down the burdens in her heart. This is what we have to do to descend, is also, we think of it as so scary and hard, and yet there's also something about it that's such a relief. Yeah. It's such a relief to be able to lay down what's not true and to lay down the burdens of what we carry that don't belong to us.
Most of my career has been focused on releasing the density of emotion that we gather through our traumas and life experiences and generational patterning. And that's what I'm thinking about as you're talking about this, that it's literally breaking up the frequency. That is the alchemy, right?
Yeah.
It's breaking up the density of those old patterns.
Yes. And I think we are not yet to that point, but when we become a bit more spiritually mature, we'll stop thinking good, bad with these things.
Right. The duality is just not.
Yeah. Right. It's not going to help. So the Quero people, for example, in Peru, they would say that density isn't a bad thing. We just want to give the density back to the earth. We feed it to the earth and the earth eats it. They call it, they have a word for it that's really compelling for the density, the dark stuff, the heavy stuff. They're just like, oh yeah, we want to give that to the earth. It's like no big deal. It's neutral. But absolutely, I so agree with you that, and I'm so heartened by the ways that we have now emerging so many modalities to help people to move through their traumas, the somatic healing work, the ancestral healing work. It's absolutely essential. So the heart, yes. And in fact, when we're speaking right now, it is during one of the heart chakra gates of the evening star part of the Venus cycle. So, and the descent, of course, is the heart. And then there's the solar plexus chakra gate. And in that chakra, for many women, it has to do with this. But what I always feel with the solar plexus is what this woman, Amy Schur, she wrote the book, How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can. She would say, I agree. Most disease is actually caused by the places where we dim our lights. If we dim our lights, it will cause disease because our spirits want to shine. We want to be who we are in our full authenticity. And I see that as the realm of the solar plexus. Do I get to expand? Do I get to be me? Do I get to, enjoy and just shine? And what are the places where I'm dimming my light? So to me, that's the solar plexus. And then the sacral, of course, the womb, if there's the throat and the womb are the two centers of the body for most women, where a lot of the congestion happens.
A lot of trauma there from
a lot of trauma,
like millennia,
millennia. Exactly. And this is why in my own life path, a lot of the work I do also is with womb alchemy, because I had my own journey of that. I had a hysterectomy and it was a painful process to go there. I did everything I could to not have that happen. But when it finally did, I made a sacred offering. It was ceremony. I rebirthed myself. And that happened because I knew I was offering all the trauma I had absorbed and all the females in my ancestry and all of, from my lifetime, every lifetime, all the women. That's what I offered. All of the pain that I had absorbed and carried for others that was no longer appropriate. I then made a vow to never heal with my body again, because that's what we often do. We're not trained to, we're trained, and we also, for generations, have learned to heal other people with our bodies. And I said, no, it wasn't appropriate. It's not appropriate for most of us anymore.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, right?
So interesting, because I just had this conversation with my husband. Like, I'm not willing to land my body into someone else's density out of empathy anymore. Like, that boundary is just set. Like, I won't do it.
Won't do it.
I was coming from an altruistic place, or so I thought, but it was affecting my health. So it's interesting you brought
and
it
it
up.
does. It does. Yeah. We were wired for that at one time, but our world is not set up for that anymore. It's not for us to do it anymore. So that I got really strong messages around that. And interestingly, I was born when Venus was at the solar plexus chakra gate in the morning star, journey. And what will happen is sometimes it moves. So then when I was 8 years old, it moved to the sacral. So for me, my chakra gates literally are the solar plexus and the sacral chakra gates. And I literally experienced that, right? The releasing and the clearing in a very literal way. So this can be very literal work.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
I think I was born, if I remember correctly, I don't know if you have a remembrance of our session, but I was born in the evening star, I believe in the throat gate, but it was quickly, like you, moving into the brow.
Ah, that's right. That's right, isn't it? That sounds right. Yeah, the throat to the brow. Yeah, that both and kind of Gemini.
We don't do so well with duality.
Or we do really well with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's this releasing, letting go. And what I love about the alchemy of descent as seen through this journey is that it's so comprehensive. It's so multi-layered. And then when you get to the root, then, that's a letting go, really of, this is sometimes the most challenging. It's like disconnecting from the grids of the ancestral agreements that have been made, or that karmic kind of pattern that's so alive that can compel you to do things that are absolutely against the flow of your spirit.
That's not yours to clear.
It's not yours. It's not yours to clear. And it's like the Saturn territory, it's Capricorn territory. And I would say the root is exactly what we collectively have been clearing as Pluto's moved through the sign of Capricorn since 2008 and is now shifted into Aquarius. It's going to be doing that for another 2 years. But yeah, it's a
which
time
it hasn't done for 240
48 years. That's right. Hasn't done
can
that.
we just really briefly talk about how that could manifest, or what that could look like? Because that happened in February.
Well, no, it's actually the.
Oh wait, no, it was third week of March.
It just happened. Yeah, March 2023, or March 23rd, and so that is the first time Pluto's moved into Aquarius for 248 years. It will keep moving in and out of Aquarius, Capricorn. It's not going to be fully into the sign of Aquarius until the end of 2024. So this will often happen with a planet like Pluto because it moves so slowly. It goes retrograde, direct. So there's just a way it takes a while to go back and forth. But that event, March 23rd, when that happened, I mean, I see 2023 as a tipping point astrologically. That's a big deal. I've never said this before about a year, and every year, as we know, has been incredibly potent. 2012 to 2020, I mean, every year from that point forward has been just increasing in intensity. But 2023, I've seen this for a long time, is this movement where we really are beginning this, I would say, an emergence process. I feel like we're beginning to crack out of the chrysalis. We're beginning an emergent process, more of a lightening process, where we really have been in the chrysalis. We have been in this kind of soup of this deathing, birthing portal. And Pluto in Aquarius is a big piece of that. So, because Pluto has been in Capricorn, it's been really dismantling, unwinding all of the institutions, all of the bones of our modern society as we know it. and all of the facets of patriarchy. So Pluto in Aquarius is helping us, is really energizing, bringing alive the seeds of this new emergent society and culture that is more informed by the feminine, and not just by the feminine, but by balance between masculine and feminine principles.
So fascinating. So I want to just touch into, as in our time remaining, I want to touch into the morning star versus the evening star, because you and I kind of alluded to that with our charts, that you are able to see what, like you have a specialty within astrology where you look at where the Venus placement is when someone is born from multiple standpoints. But I think most prolific for me was understanding morning star versus evening star. And if you're born when Venus is a morning star versus the evening star.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So with the work that I've done for many years with Venus Alchemy, and that I'm also doing myself now, we have 4 phases. We look at 4 phases that you will be born into in the Venus cycle. One is morning star, one is Inanna underworld. That's when she's behind the sun for 2 months. And then one is the evening star phase, and then what we call the metamorphic underworld phase. That's when she's in between the sun and the earth for about a week. So those 4 phases. If you're born in morning star phase, then you are much more of a bold, kind of like really potent, powerful kind of person who is, in a sense, kind of starts out almost like you're more innocent. You don't know what you don't know. It's more masculine, really. Morning star is more yang, evening star is more yin. So you can, it's almost like you add Aries. For those of you who know astrology, you can add a dose of Aries, like this uninitiated warrior. I'm so powerful. I'm so strong. I don't know anything. I don't know how bad the underworld is. So I'm going to go to it.
Like, bring it on.
Bring it on. Yeah. There's that energy of just diving into life. And so there's this way, and just understand, depending on where in the morning star, if you're born at the very beginning, it's going to feel different than if you're right before she enters the underworld. So there is a continuum, but by and large, a person born into the morning star cycle is someone who's here to make an offering of their lives, someone who's here for the descent journey as kind of a larger kind of tone or direction of your path. So it means that there's something about this deeper letting go process that is more pronounced in your initiatory life journey.
If someone says yes to it.
If someone said,
if they keep resisting,
it's gonna be rough.
Yeah.
So you're right, absolutely right. And to see and to dignify that part of your journey. So I think one of the beautiful parts of that is to not judge yourself if you feel like your life feels as if it is, you've made these choices to other people that might seem really kind of out there, kind of crazy. Like, why did you do that? Well, I needed to have this experience because my soul wanted to mature. I wanted to become more human. I didn't want to be in the lofty realms of queen or spiritual bypass. I wanted to become more human. So that's something to understand and to have a lot of compassion for. As Morningstar, you're not here to be above it all. You're not here to be to reign supreme and be distant and bejeweled queen. Not what you're for.
Yeah.
It's really to dive into the fray in a sense, and it takes courage. So that's one thing to consider with Morningstar. And then with the underworld's Venus signature, that is someone who you can almost add Scorpio or Pluto to that. So it's like, that's a person who really their life is marked by pretty intense death, rebirth themes. So that's a person who has a lot of emotional depth, a lot of intensity. I've often found that you can look at a person's chart and they might have no Pluto, no Scorpio, not much in the 8th house. But if they have this Venus in the underworld signature, their life will operate as someone who has a lot of Scorpio, for example.
Wow.
So pretty emotionally intense territory there. And then with the evening star, that's the priestess, that's the love goddess historically. So add earth. You can add the element of earth. You can add maybe traditionally they would say add Virgo. So again, it's more of the priestess archetype. But the evening star journey is you have to understand that you are someone who has already gone through the initiation. You're an initiated goddess, an initiated individual. So for you, the journey isn't as much about, we all have to release and clear, right? So it is that. but there's also the need to remember what you forgot. There's a need to retrieve, recover, and restore what you had laid down, perhaps in another lifetime, perhaps in this lifetime. So the journey, the initiatory journey, is more one of, interesting to say, I say in ascension. That's what we would say sometimes. It's a emergence from the underworld. But of course, that doesn't mean what we think it means.
Right. It's
right.
Ascension.
Ascension, exactly. But I would say that there is something about, interestingly, for Evening Star, there can be something about it's remembering what the Greeks called anamnesis, remembering what the soul already knows. So depending on the chakra gate, depending on where you're born, there can be, again, this real concentration of, in your case, for example, with the brow and the
yeah, because I was born during the evening
throat.
star. Correct. Yeah.
Because you're Evening Star, yeah. That there's something about recovering the wisdom from the voice, like all the things you need to say. You could say that for many lifetimes you weren't able to say that you need to say now, or all the things that you couldn't see, or all the things you know. There's so much that you know that you need to be able to uncover that center of the third eye so you can see again, because there's such depth of wisdom there. So,
I definitely
you're the
feel myself
initiated.
in that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and
then
then
of
the
course,
last one is,
and yeah, the last one is the metamorphic goddess. So this is the one where it's like when Inanna, when Venus goes through a cycle and she ends the cycle, she's going from being one version of the goddess, like say she's the Capricorn goddess for one cycle, and then she's born as Morning Star as a completely new archetype of the goddess. So this is a full and complete death birth of identity. So somebody who's born into the metamorphic phase, they are often larger than life individuals. They're often here to make a big contribution in the world, and their life will be marked by big shifts, changes, rapid, sudden beginnings, endings. There's kind of this wild card layer to that for them. So almost like adding your Uranus, or this kind of lightning kind of feeling of rapid change.
So fascinating. So that's why I went to you, because I'm like, I want to know what's going on with my Venus phase that I was born into. So that was so like just really ratifying for me. Like it was just like, oh, cool. Like this makes total sense of why I'm oriented to all these things and drawn to these things. So if somebody wants to do a reading with you, obviously they can go to your website. Do you want to share a little bit about that offer and also what you have with an upcoming program?
Absolutely. So I love to do Venus readings for people. I have a special offer where people can buy a package. They get a shamanic astrology birth chart reading, a Venus reading, and then an integration. So I often recommend that because shamanic astrology readings are very different, and these two readings weave together. So I do, but the Venus reading itself, we will look at where you were born in the Venus cycle and go much more in depth with that and how that really speaks to your initiatory life path. And then we'll also look at the sign of Venus in your chart and what the aspects are. So we'll really dive deep into the goddess blueprint, basically. And my intent in each of these readings is really to activate that. It's an activation process. It does open gates.
Yeah, it did that for me. I have to say, it opened up more. And I've been contemplating much of what came through ever since. Just FYI.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
No, thank you.
I get that a lot. Yeah. So there's that. And then I also have a 6-month program beginning at the summer solstice that is going to be weaving. This is one of those programs where I weave together my medicine in the larger astrological field, working with the moon, with Venus, with other layers of astrology. And also I weave everything in with the dreaming. So for me, I feel like astrology is alive. I believe everybody is here to help channel the new versions of astrology. And so my containers are always about supporting individuals and being part of that. So it'll be a deeply held container to work with Venus, to work with the moon, to work with the dreaming. And it's going to be an initiatory portal. It's called Womb to Wings. And that's going to be beginning in the summer solstice and ending at the winter solstice.
Perfect.
So look for that
Just
too.
leading into this, the Venus starting her descent journey on August 19th of this year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a whole other thing. And I guess staying connected to you will bring
Yeah.
people into the space of being able to work with that as well. I'm looking
That's
forward
right.
to that.
That's right.
I'm feeling called to work with that because there's something I want to birth on the other side 18 months later.
Absolutely.
And I know that there can be a direct correlation to how that weaves
Yeah.
through your life as you're going through that, if
Absolutely.
you're intentional and
Yeah,
if you're aware,
absolutely.
it can be
Yeah.
very magical. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you for your time today,
Mm.
Tami. This was really beautiful.
You are so welcome. It's so powerful. I'm just so honored to be with you, Cherie.